So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have a number of guests from around the world watching us tonight. We are very fortunate to host some phenomenal guest speakers. But before we do so, before I introduce them, my name is Paul Charney. I'm chairman of the Technion UK. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Technion, not because you don't know it, but because we're always so proud of it. And we will never pass up an opportunity to talk a little bit about it. The pride of Israel. As you may know, Technion was established in 1912. It was the first institution of higher learning in Israel, then Palestine. And the visionaries that set up the Technion at the time showed forward-thinking understanding that the success of the Jewish state would depend heavily on technology before the establishment of the state. For 60% of Israel's industrial exports and 30% of Israel's total exports. All the big tech companies rushed to Israel, and all of them, including Google, Microsoft, IBM, Yahoo, Hewlett, Packard, have established their operation near or even on the campus of the Technion itself, where they can take advantage of the Technion's research, the power of its intellect, and its outstanding graduates. Israel is proud to have amongst it Nobel Prize winners. It also has 5 academic prizes, which the country has won. And I am proud to tell you today that 4 of these Nobel Prizes have come from the Technion. Today, we are very fortunate to meet and hear from one of those Nobel Prize winners and from a phenomenal speaker alongside. It's now my honor to introduce those 2 speakers. Please remember to send your questions, to ask those questions, to probe our speakers through the webinar, through the chat, through the facilities that are provided. We will answer those during our Q&A session thereafter. So, Professor Dan Shechtman, whatever I say now is not going to suffice, will not do it justice. So it's an honor to meet you, sir. And it's an honor to say a little bit about you. In 2011, Technion graduate, I say it again, Professor Dan Shechtman received the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for his discovery of quasicrystals, a new form of matter. The professor has spent the majority of his academic career at the Technion. Alongside him is Professor Shlomo Maital. Professor Shlomo Maital is the academic director of Technion's Institute of Management, Israel's leading executive leadership development institute. His research currently focuses on profit-driven innovation, how to combine creativity and discipline to achieve marketplace success. The Technion UK is proud to produce tonight for you 2 of Israel's finest. Over to you, and please, any questions, feel free to answer. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the introduction. I hope you can all hear me. Just before we begin, let me reiterate, we're going to speak, Danny and I, for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A and we'll respond to questions. Danny, thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview. I'm going to call you Danny because we've known each other for 40 years, and I'm one of your biggest admirers. So let's begin, Danny, without further ado. We use the term R&D, research and development, all the time in Israel. There are more than 300 R&D centers. Paul mentioned some of them. Many belong to global, innovative, high-tech companies. They come here in search of Israeli creativity. But Danny, I believe there's no such thing as R&D. R is research, D is development of products and services, creative ones. The foundation of the D is the R, the research. And as an Israeli Nobel laureate, you've excelled in basic scientific research. So Danny, in our conversation, I want to discuss with you how to win a Nobel Prize. The official title of our session is How Israeli Science Has Contributed to Making Israel a World-Leading High-Tech Nation. But I think we can also share with our viewers some secrets about how to win a Nobel Prize, how you won a Nobel Prize. And then we'll discuss how and why Israeli entrepreneurs, many of them Technion graduates, are changing the world. So Donnie, let's set the stage. It is Saturday, December 10th, 2011, the anniversary of
Okay, Shlomo, you're on.
Danny, can you hear me?
I hear you, yes.
Did you hear my question?
Please ask the question again, because you were frozen.
Okay, we're having some web difficulties. I hope our viewers will be patient. So let me ask the question again, Danny. I apologize for the technical.
That's the question, not the introduction.
Just the question. The question is, Danny, it's Saturday, December 10th, 2011, the anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death. That's the day every year the Nobel Prize is awarded. In Stockholm, you received the prize from the King of Sweden. Tell us about your feelings, your emotions. Tell us about the ceremony. Tell us who came with you to the ceremony.
Okay, the most important is the family that came with me, my wife, Professor Tzipi Shechtman, my 4 children and their families. Now we have 12 grandchildren. And at that time, some of them were too young. So we brought part of the family. My brother was there. And it was, you know, for every Nobel laureate, this is an amazing event. The climax of all events. Although I received many awards before the Nobel, as many of my colleagues, Nobel laureates, like the Wolf Prize and the Aminov Prize and the Israel Prize and quite a few more. But this is the climax. And you can receive many awards before the Nobel, but no award after the Nobel. That's it. This is the end of line. It's an amazing feeling. The ceremony, you know, the first time the Nobel Prize was given was 1901. So they had 110 years of experience before they gave the prize to me. And there is a long tradition of excellent performance and amazing. So, you know, it's quite an event in one's life, the climax of achievement, and a global recognition. This is important for scientists to have recognition, especially this global recognition.
So Danny, your journey to Stockholm was a very long one. It actually began when you were a very small child. Around the time Israel was born, you were strongly influenced, I think, by three key things. You were influenced by a book, by a scientific device, and your grandfather, who gave you a present. The book was Jules Verne's book, Mysterious Island. It's about a group whose plane crashes on a remote island, and there's a brilliant engineer, Cyrus Smith, and he helps the group survive. They make fire, pottery, bricks, nitroglycerin, iron, a telegraph. Tell us about the role of the book in your life as a Nobel scientist.
Yeah, well, you know, when I was young, I read many books, but more than that, I read several books many times over. Time and again. I finished the book, I started again. Mystery Island, or Mysterious Island, is a 3-volume book. I read it 25 times. I knew it by heart, more or less. Why did I read it? Because I was fascinated by the hero of the group of 5 people who were stranded on an island. As you mentioned, Cyrus Smith, that Jules Verne created. He was an engineer, and he could make everything. He knew chemistry, he knew material science, he knew physics. He was an amazing person. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be able to make everything. And so my dream in life was to study mechanical engineering. This is what I wanted to do. And indeed, after my military service, after high school and military service, they accepted me to the Technion, and I studied mechanical engineering. 4 years later, I became a proud graduate of the Technion, mechanical engineer. The year was 1966. There was a big recession in Israel, and I could not find a job. So I said, by that time I was married for 2 years already. I needed to have some salary. I said, well, I'll do my master's degree in material science, and in 2 years I will find a job, which I did. I did find a job. But during these 2 years of doing science, I fell in love with science, forgot my engineering, and decided to become a scientist, continued for my PhD, and that's more or less what happened. So that year of recession sealed my fate, more or less.
Wow. So Israel lost a mechanical engineer, but we gained a Nobel scientist, and we're fortunate. Let's discuss your grandfather, Danny. Your grandfather emigrated to Israel a long time ago in the second Aliyah. That was 1904 to 1914, just before World War I. And your grandfather started a printing shop. As a child, your grandfather gave you an unusual gift. What was this gift, and tell us how that gift influenced your career?
Okay, great. I will tell you, but 1 minute about my grandfather. He came to Israel in 1906.
Right.
He didn't just create a printing shop. He created the first printing house in Israel together with Ben Gurion, later to be prime minister, together with Ben Tzvi, who became the second president of the country. This was a superb group of people. So he was quite a character. My grandmother came into in 1908 to study in Betzalel to make jewelry. Okay, that's the background. My grandfather had a great influence on me. He was a no-nonsense person, and he knew some science, and he could answer my questions in science. The present he gave me was a magnifying glass. And it was amazing. I was running in the fields of Ramat Gan, now a big city, but at that time, most of it were fields, looking at everything small, insects, flowers, broken stones, everything small. And during that period of time, I fell in love with the little things, with small things. I fell in love with them. And I knew that I could really see more with optical instruments.
Cool.
Later on, when I was in 5th grade, the teacher, it was a science teacher, told the class, you know, we have a microscope in school. Oh, I said, wonderful. Can you bring it to class? Oh, yes, yes. The next week, I begged him, can you bring it? Oh, yes, yes. So finally, he brought it to class and he said, Dan, you are the first and most interested child here. Come see, you'll be the first to look at the microscope. I looked at the microscope. There was a leaf of some plant there, and you could see the chlorophyll moving. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. I could not leave the microscope. I asked the teacher, can you bring it to the class every week? He said, no, no, no. No, we have other subjects. Can I look at the microscope myself? No, no, no. Where's the microscope? In the storeroom. Can I go to the storeroom and look at it? No, no, children are not allowed. Bad teacher, bad teacher. You see the child is interested in something, help him, encourage him. But later on, when I was a student at Technion for my master's degree, the Technion bought the first transmission electron microscope, and I dedicated days and evenings to working on the microscope and became an expert in transmission electron microscopy to the extent that I could teach classes for graduate students, but also developed quite a few techniques to prepare specimens for electron microscopy, which is quite an art. And it was transmission electron microscopy that brought me the fame. Okay, I will continue, although I don't see you. In the year 19 when I was on sabbatical, 1982, I went on sabbatical for my first sabbatical to National Bureau of Standards, NBS. And there I did a lot of electron microscopy. In fact, it was a wonderful period of 2 years in which I did fantastic research with colleagues. This laboratory, National Bureau of Standards, now it's called NIST, is so powerful and the people are so good there, amazing group, and it was a wonderful collaboration. And this is where I made a discovery that eventually brought me the Nobel Prize.
Danny, amazing coincidence. I think you and I have the same tie. Is that right? Can we see your tie? How about that? Yes. So Danny, this is my favorite tie. You gave it to me. This is a scientific tie. It's a Shechtmanite tie. The pattern that we see here on the tie is the quasicrystalline matter that you discovered. And you discovered it, as you mentioned, in that famous day, April 8th, 1982.
Yes.
The microscope plays a key role in this whole story because you were an expert in transmission electron microscopy, and you made a photograph of an aluminum alloy, and it was very strange indeed.
Yes.
Something like this. It should not have been possible according to existing theory.
Yes.
And in fact, other people may have seen it, but they didn't believe it, or they didn't actually look and see it. Tell us about looking at an unusual thing and discovering it. And for 5 years, Danny, for 5 years, the world's leading crystallographer, Linus Pauling, winner of 2 Nobel Prizes, not just one, vilified you and denied your finding at a major conference, called you a quasi-scientist, and you stuck to your guns, which is part of winning a Nobel Prize. Tell us about that awful period when you were vilified by the world's top chemist.
Okay, let me just correct you a little bit. The resistance of Professor Linus Pauling, arguably the greatest chemist in the 20th century in the United States, really a very important scientist. His negative approach started 1984 when the first publication came out, and it didn't last for 5 years, it lasted for 10 years until 1994, and then he stopped because he died. But he was a leader and the spearhead of resistance. He had many, many followers. You know, Linus Pauling was the father of the American Chemical Society, and the godfather of American society. I mean, and this society counts probably 200,000 members, and he was the big hero. And he was indeed a great scientist, but he could not accept quasi-periodicity. And when he started fighting me and my followers, he was a spearhead and I was a spearhead, but he had many followers than I had. When he started, he was the sun in the sky, and I was, what's his name? Mm-hmm. But over time, that changed. And my fame came up, right? Came higher. And in his last years, he could not publish papers anymore on quasi-periodic materials because they were not accepted for publication. So that period ended. Many people could not accept this strange behavior of atoms as they arrange themselves in a non-periodic fashion. Why would they do that? And there's a lot of thermodynamic studies that have been done that prove that yes, it can be done. And the fact is that quasi-periodic materials do exist. I discovered them in 3 materials. The publication was on 1, but there are hundreds of them. There are very, very many such materials, and they have interesting properties and applications. So here we have a case in which a very basic study brings up new materials, which means new applications. But let me dwell on that for a minute. I was not funded to do basic study. I was funded by DARPA, Defense Advanced Project Agency of the United States, an amazing institute, to develop aluminum-based materials for aerospace applications. And this is what I did. But when I prepared these alloys, supposedly useful, I did prepare something that could be useful. For instance, aluminum 2% manganese could be useful. Aluminum 5%, yeah, maybe. But I also prepared aluminum 10% and 50% and 10%. Totally not useful, but very interesting scientifically. So, and there it was in aluminum 25 or 8% manganese, there was the new structure that opened the new field of quasi-periodic materials.
Wow. So the kind of semi-answer to our question to our viewers, how to win a Nobel Prize, is to be very curious from an early age and to pursue your curiosity despite all the opposition.
Yes, there are many lessons from that period.
So, Danny, back to Stockholm. Traditionally, the Nobel laureate gives a Nobel address. You gave your address on Thursday, December 8th, at the University of Stockholm. I've seen your slides that you used in this wonderful presentation. And you ask an interesting question in one of your slides. And the question, as we've been discussing, other people actually had used electron microscopy, had taken photographs, and had seen quasicrystalline material, or they looked at it, but they didn't see it. So why did they fail to discover it? And you did, and you give 5 reasons. One of the reasons has to do with expertise in electron microscopy. You're an expert. But there are 4 other reasons that have little to do with anything other than character. Professionalism, tenacity, believing in yourself, and courage. So tell us a bit about the role that character plays in science, not just curiosity or knowledge or professional expertise.
Yes, well, this is very Israeli, I must say. All these characteristics, yes, I have them, humble me, but many Israelis do. We live in Israel under a feeling that we must be very active, that we must create, that we are very few and far between the Arab world around us, and a lot of hostility. And so we have no fear. Israelis have no fear. And Israel, and you know, when I am a professional and I check myself time and again, and I'm a worst critic, once I convince myself that I'm correct, I stand tall. You want to object me? Fine. Repeat my experiment. Show me what went wrong. Don't tell me it's not in the books. If you listen to what's in the books, either you are religious, which is fine with me, or you are old-fashioned scientists, because you really, really have to know that the books change. They change all the time because new discoveries are made. So yeah, it's very Israeli. I was born in Israel, raised in Israel, was in the military service. I went through the whole process of becoming a true Israeli. Yeah, and of course the Technion contributed a lot to my character and gave me the confidence that I have good background that to stand tall against a person like Linus Pauling, you know?
I think we can mention here, Danny, I did a questionnaire study of Technion graduates to see how many of them had done a startup. And the numbers are astonishing. One Technion graduate in every 4 does a startup. That's a very high number given the risks in doing a startup. By the way, one female graduate in every 7 also does a startup. So our women are also very bold rather than just the men. Danny, I think we can offer some advice to some of our viewers. Many of them are younger, beginning their career, middle of their career. And you give interesting advice in a talk that I've heard you give. This one you gave in China at the Technion's joint venture in Shenzhou. And you told the young people there they should become T-shaped. They should become expert in something and go very deep in that subject, like you became an expert on transmission electron microscopy. But they should also learn a little bit about a wide range of things, the horizontal bar of the T. Tell us about that advice that you gave to young people.
Yeah, well, I give this advice to young people around the world, and I give very many lectures around the world. I tell young people the following: if you want to succeed in your life, in whatever you want, science or something else, become an expert in something. Become an expert in something you like. Choose a subject, even now that you are in high school, choose a subject that you like and try to become number 1 in your class, number 1 in your school, try to be number 1 in the world. You want to be a scientist? Fine, that's great. But more than that, you have to have broad knowledge of science. You have to know enough physics, enough chemistry, enough the language of mathematics, enough biology. You have to have some feeling of engineering. And you don't have to be an expert in all of them, but you have to know what's possible and what's not possible, and how to do things and how to make things. And become an expert in something you like. Start now. Try to be number 1. You want to be a musician? Fine. But try to be a musician number 1 in whatever you do. I prefer that you become a scientist.
Me too. Me too. And Danny, we both regret the fact that Israel has so many lawyers, and worse than that, so many economists, and too few scientists and engineers. We hope that can be remedied. So speaking about entrepreneurs, Danny, in 1987, you did something unusual. This was 4 years before the big Russian immigration that brought us 1 million well-educated Russian scientists, engineers, nurses, doctors. You launched a new course at the Technion called Technological Entrepreneurship, long before Israel became Startup Nation. It was an unusual course. You didn't allow theory in the course. You asked entrepreneurs to come, stand up for an hour in front of the students and tell their story, honestly. The screw-ups, the mistakes, the failures, and the successes. And in doing so, you opened a window for many Technion students into something they weren't fully aware of. Tell us about this course that you launched and why you did that.
Okay, for the listeners, Shlomo Maital was besides me from day 1, and he is still there after so many years, 30-some years. The idea was the following. When I was a student at the Technion, long before that, for my bachelor's in mechanical engineering, the spirit of the Technion told us, you'll be, not in words, but this was the spirit, you'll be so good that when you graduate, everybody will want to hire you. And I said, wow, that's wonderful, but what if I want to open my own technology business? The word startup did not exist. I want to open my own technology business. Why don't you teach me how to do that? And I asked some professors, teach me about the law of patents, what is a limited company, what is marketing, what is market survey. They said, no, we don't teach how to courses, we teach principle at the Technion. In 1986, I became a full professor, and I said, well, now maybe I can be student number one in the class that I wanted to listen to. And I created this class and consulted with you, and you were there all the time. The class was astonishing success. I booked the Churchill Auditorium of the Technion. At the time it had 600 seats. I think now it has 650 seats for the class. 800 people came for the first day of class. They sat on the stairs, they were hanging from the windows. It was amazing, amazing. It was the largest Technion class ever. And I could not teach. I was student number one in this class. And I invited speakers, and the speakers were divided into three categories. Number one, people who started from zero but made it big time. Steve Wertheimer, Uzziah Galil, Yuda Bornitsky, and so on. Group number two were entrepreneurs who are now fighting to have their company a success. And group number three are the professionals. A lawyer who tells what is a limited company and why I should open a limited company and not take the financial burden on your narrow shoulders. I invited the patent office of the country to tell about IP. I invited somebody to talk about marketing. I invited somebody to talk about market survey, how important it is to know your market so well if you want to succeed. That class continues, and now, Shlomo, you're running it. I ran it for 30 years with your help, and now you're on your own, still continue to run this class. Amazing, amazing story. It was not easy to start it, by the way. There was some resistance at the Technion.
There was indeed, there was indeed. But you're no stranger to resistance. And speaking of resistance, we might mention this. Danny, many of engineers and scientists shun politics like it was leprosy. But in 2014, you did something very unusual for a renowned scientist, and you became a candidate for president of Israel. And many felt it was a lost cause. You're no stranger to lost causes. Tell us what your thinking was in becoming a candidate for president of Israel against a great deal of opposition.
Well, the law in Israel doesn't say that you have to be a politician to become president. Everybody can be a candidate. Fact is that you do have to be a politician, otherwise they will not vote for you, because in Israel, unlike in many other countries, it's not the people that choose the president, it's the parliament, 120 members of the parliament, and they confiscated that post. It is ours. Only one of us can become president. But that did not deter me. I was liked by the people very much. And the idea was the following. You know, things are not done properly in Israel in several fields. And the main one which bothers me is education. We are lagging. If you look at OECD, if you look at PISA exams, if you look at many other parameters, Israel is not doing well on education. Although the higher education in Israel is very good, I think. I think we have 8 very good universities, teach also engineering in other universities. But primary school is a problem. And then secondary school is partly a problem. And things should be done right. And I thought that from that position, I could affect the education system in Israel. But of course, that didn't happen. but I had my experience. It was fun.
And I might mention, Donnie, you've done an amazing TV series teaching science to kindergarten children.
Yes.
And it's incredible what you can teach to little kids. Tell us about that.
Yes, I will tell you about two projects that I started. The first one, we'll talk about this, the first one. I said that we should bring science to every child, but in primary schools, they teach very little science. And in most cases, they have no science at all. But young children are very curious. And I thought that if you plant the bug of science in their heads and raise their interest in science, their curiosity about the world around them, if I will show them how to look at the world around them, then maybe we can start. And I started with a small project, which is not a television, to open scientific kindergartens in Haifa. With the mayor of Haifa, I made a project which he supported, and we started with 60 kindergartens. We developed a program, and we taught an hour of science several times a week in 60 kindergartens in Haifa. But the teachers were the kindergarten teachers. We taught them science, but they just don't have it. So it was lost in translation, and now only 30 kindergartens are left. However, one amazing result of that was a special science kindergarten that was open in Haifa. And that building that has 90 children, 3 groups of 30, 30, 30, that building has a laboratory. And the teacher in that laboratory has masters in chemistry, and she can teach high school, but she teaches young children. And that works very well. And if you enter that laboratory and don't look at the children, you think you are at the Technion. Oh, wonderful chemistry laboratory. Quite nice, but 10 children sitting around the round table studying science and experimenting. And then I said, okay, how do I bring this gospel, this message to more people? And I said, hey, television. So I went to the management of the Israel Educational Television Channel and told them about the idea. I prepared a lecture of 20 minutes. After 1 minute, they said, okay, don't talk, we'll do it. And we did it. And I started to prepare 30 clips about general science, the world around us, about some cosmology, Mother Earth, and everything around it, and about biology. But after I ran 10 clips, which you can see on the internet, it's in Hebrew though. It's called in Hebrew, Liyot Mad'an in Professor Dan, to be a scientist with Professor Dan. And there you can see 3 children sitting with me at the table, and we perform experiment and we talk about different subjects in science. It was amazing that grandmother and grandfather sat with the children in the evening to look at this program, and parents liked it very much. But the television channel stopped it after 10 clips, so that was that. I tried to convince other countries to do that for their sake, but it did not catch for some reason. But it's wonderful, really wonderful. It's a very good idea.
Absolutely. So Dan, let me mention before we continue, our viewers are invited to send questions. Use the Q&A and write them down. I'll read them, and I'll try to at least give some of them to our guest, to Dan Shechtman. And let me mention, we just received a comment from Ida. And Ida already has been influenced by you, Danny. And she said that she's going to buy a microscope and a magnifying glass for her little grandson. And maybe he will win a Nobel Prize one day.
May I comment on that?
Yes.
Yes, it's a wonderful idea to buy a microscope, but buy a stereo optical microscope. It has 2 oculars and 2 objectives, and you see in 3 dimensions. To my left on this table, here to my left, I have this microscope. the family of my 4 children, they all have this microscope. I bought them as a present.
Wow.
And you can take movies on this microscope. It's amazing. It's amazing. I really recommend that you buy stereo optical microscope. Not one objective, 2 objectives to see in 3 dimensions.
I guess we should mention your son, Yoav. You and Tzipi have 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. Yoav is a professor at Technion, and he's an expert in microscopy, no surprise there. And he's using his knowledge to help us with this terrible epidemic. So Danny, like father, like son.
Yes.
Danny, you after you won the Nobel Prize, especially, many Nobel winners rest on their laurels or return to their science bench. And you got on a plane. I imagine you put on several 100,000 miles. You traveled the world with the message of entrepreneurship and innovation. Tell us about this mission that you embarked on, the world leaders that you met.
Yes, on the average, I visit 30 cities every year and give lectures, several lectures in each one of them. And that excludes lectures in Israel. So I gave about 100 lectures every year. Not this year though. In the year of Corona, I'm stuck at home. But every other year, it just so happened, 30, 31, 32 cities around the world. Over time, I gave lectures in universities, in conferences, and in some other large events. In one event, I gave a lecture to 10,000 people. It was in a university, graduation of a university, and there were 10,000 people in the football field, and I gave them a lecture. Sometimes the groups, of course, smaller and so on. Over time, I met many world leaders. I met presidents of countries. I met prime ministers of countries. In my last visit to China, I met Prime Minister of China for a long conversation. This was after the Corona problem started. I came back to Israel from China at the end of January. This was quite interesting, meeting these lawyers and trying to convince them to develop entrepreneurship in their countries and to develop and invest in basic science. It is so important for the development of every country.
Absolutely. So let's take a question from our audience. Let me get the name of the person who asked it. It's anonymous. So anonymous wants to know, Danny, is there a use for quasicrystals, the matter that you discovered? How can we use it?
Okay. When you discover a new class of materials, such as quasi-periodic materials, people start to study their properties, magnetic properties, electrical properties, mechanical properties, chemical properties, you name it, properties. And if you find an interesting property, then you look for uses. And so quasi-periodic materials have several quite interesting properties. They can strengthen other materials, and a company in Sweden named Sandvik, quite famous, developed a fantastic steel, one of the best in the world, stainless steel, which is strengthened by quasi-periodic particles. Quasi-periodic materials have low coefficient of friction with some things. They have non-stick properties, and a company in France developed frying pans coated with quasicrystals to which the omelette doesn't stick, or the filet mignon doesn't stick. Other properties such as magnetic properties find uses. Electrical properties are quite interesting. Some quasi-periodic materials behave the opposite as superconductors. Superconductors, the resistivity goes to 0 as you lower the temperature. Some quasi-periodic materials, the resistivity goes up as you lower the temperature. And that has also other uses. So yeah, there are quite a few applications.
Cool. So this is a really interesting question, also from Anonymous. And the question is about children. So we stimulate children's curiosity. And the question is, Danny, is it enough to turn them loose, what he calls freestyle? In other words, stimulate their curiosity and turn them loose. How do we channel that curiosity?
How would you encourage young children to try to ask questions, to look at the world around them and try to understand it? This is the curiosity. The parents have such an important role, and the teachers. But let us start with the parents. The parents can turn young children into young scientists by asking them questions and teaching them to ask questions. If you don't understand something around you, please ask. Look at the world around you. Look at the sun, okay? The sun gives us light during the day. What gives us light during the night? The moon. No, the moon doesn't give us light during the night. The moon is a reflector. It reflects the light of the sun. So the sun also gives us light at night, and the moon is a reflector. Think like this. Learn to ask questions and make observations. Look at things, look at how things are arranged and ask questions. Look at the electrical collections. Look at screens. How is it made? Ask yourself, ask your child, how do you think it's made? How do you think? This is one thing. Other thing, what are these materials? What is wood? What is metal? What is ceramics? What are polymers? What is plastic? Show the child things that are made of polymers and plastic. By the way, when I was a child, nothing was made of plastic, nothing at all. All right? Except maybe rubber bands, which is sort of, polymer. And so ask your child, what do you think this is made of? What do you think that is made of? Why do you think they make tables made of wood and not something else? What is it in wood that enables you to make tables? And what is it in steel that enables you to make a hammer and tweezers? Why do you think it's made? Ask questions and talk to your child. And then you develop his knowledge and his or her knowledge and curiosity.
Danny, I have a small story to tell about that, about asking questions. So a physicist named Isidore Rabi, son of Russian immigrants, won the Nobel Prize in physics for discovering the principle of nuclear magnetic resonance. And that became the basis of the MRI device, magnetic resonance, which saved countless lives.
Yes.
He said the reason he won the Nobel Prize is his mother. And when he came home from school, we always ask our kids, what did you learn in school today? His mother never asked him that question. She said, Izzy, what good questions did you ask in school today?
Right.
And he learned to ask good questions and Nobel Prize.
Yes, this is very important, and parents know that, and many parents teach their children to ask questions, but ask clever questions.
Yes.
Don't ask stupid questions.
Yes, but hopefully teachers will be welcoming of questions and not embarrassed by them because they may not know the answer. A question from a student in Latvia, Danny. I think you've been to Latvia, I've been to Latvia.
I've been to Latvia.
Well-educated people. It's a relatively poor country.
Yes.
The question from the student in Latvia is, how can a poorer country like Latvia doesn't have the resources that Israel has? What can they do to encourage science and technology and creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship as a poor country?
Well, let me take you, young man. I hope you're a young man. Israel was poorer when we started science in Israel. It was poorer than Latvia when we started science in Israel. The Technion started long before Israel was created. And the Weizmann Institute was there later on, and the Hebrew University just came together with the Technion. We had such a wonderful institution that created scientists and created science. The resources of a country can affect the productivity of science, but developing the minds is not expensive at all. Work on developing the bright minds. The money will come from them, with them.
I think that's superb advice, Donnie. And a question from Tony Korn, who has identified himself. This is about practical entrepreneurship. The question is, Donnie, what do you think is the one key factor that brings success to a startup? The main key factor.
There are quite a few of them. First, let's start like this. First is a good idea. But a good idea worth maybe a quarter or 20% of the startup. Then work with people. The more people you work with, the better your chances to succeed. It's in the Sloan School that you teach in, and you taught for many years, Shlomo, the wisdom came that the more people that start together a startup, the higher is the chance to succeed. It came from the Sloan School. So work with other people. Discuss whatever you want with other people and learn the basics. And you have to know the market. You have to really be an expert in the market. Who are the competitors? What is the price range? What is the direction of development? You have to know all this because you are going into a competition with people who were there before you. And if you want to break into the field, you have to have some advantage. Good idea? Yes, very important. But resilience, knowledge, what's possible, what's not possible, and some chutzpah, that helps too, you know? Yes. Burst into closed doors and knock on the table and say, I need an answer, or I need a loan, or whatever.
So Donnie, now back to you as a scientist. And we have a question from a chemist, a fellow chemist. Michael Ordman wants advice. What do you think are the most exciting new fields of research in chemistry?
You know, chemistry doesn't stand alone. Chemistry stands with physics, chemistry stands with biology. It's all one thing. It's the same rule, the same thermodynamics, the same atoms, the same physical laws, the same chemical laws. It's all one field. I recommended long before the coronavirus pandemic, I recommended people to start biology. I think biology is extremely complex and it's extremely interesting and it is extremely useful. Major contribution in biology will change and do change the life of people, the life of countries. Look at this pandemic. Look at this little virus, what it did. And we are still fighting not only to find solutions, to understand what it does to our body. So if we had more biologists, more microbiologists, more people who work on developing vaccines and medications, we would have a better chance. And there will be biology there for hundreds of years from now. There will always be biology. We will always have questions to ask. And there is plenty of work for young people, their children, and their grandchildren. The more we have, the better it is. But there must be an understanding in countries that we have to invest in giving chances to biologists to develop their knowledge. And countries like Israel need to build research, civilian research centers, large civilian research centers. We don't have them. We have one relatively large Migal in the north, and that's about it. Look at the United States, the wonderful United States. Every department has so many fantastic research centers. This is why the United States is leading the world in science. They have wonderful universities, Ivy League universities, but more than that, they have research institutes which are amazing. I made my discovery in such a research institute that belongs to the Department of Commerce. And now I belong to another institute that belongs to the Department of Energy in Ames, Iowa.
Yep.
We have to learn from that. Israel can afford it. Israel, maybe Latvia not yet, but Israel can afford it. We need to build research, civilian research institutes, so that all these brains will not go to other countries.
Absolutely.
Stay here.
Danny, we have only a couple of minutes. I have to ask you this question about the coronavirus. The first case was discovered in Israel 3 months ago. We've had 17,000 cases since then. We've had about 278 deaths from the virus, which is relatively low. And yesterday we had only 16 new cases. So it looks like we've dealt with this rather well. What do you think we've done right in managing this pandemic, and maybe what have we done wrong?
Well, what the government did right is ask people not to get close to one another and wear masks and stay home as much as possible. Schools were closed and so on. We acted much like many other countries. What many countries did not do right is they did not understand that this is a war. And in the military, you give the best group to perform the tasks they can do best. And in Israel, if we had such task groups, take that people come from different professions, task groups. We should not have run the project by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health and their head and appear on television event. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to create task forces to attack a problem and so on. Some of it was done right, and mainly was done right when they gave the military the permission to, at their request, to bring equipment and to bring, and we did a fantastic job searching for equipment all over the world. We are well over-equipped with these breathing units now. We need 50 of them. We have 5,000. Let's overshoot. But there was a fear that we would have many more. Yeah. Right.
So Danny, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'd love to go on talking to you for a long time. Thank you, Dan Shechtman, for this intimate and revealing conversation. And let's both, you and I, thank our wonderful Technion supporters at Technion UK. We have over 30 labs at the Technion, and through this lockdown, through the epidemic, the pandemic, those labs have been working, and our scientists at Technion and engineers have been trying to use everything they know to find useful ways to deal with this awful virus. And their equipment, the buildings, much of it come from our Technion supporters abroad. So for those who support us, we salute you. Special thanks to Paul Charney, and of course to Sophie for organizing this webcast. We had 100 viewers. That's a nice number. Danny, thank you so much. Be well, be safe, and all the best. And goodbye to our participants.
Thank you, Shlomo. I hope to see you in person.
I hope so. Very soon, Danny. Very, very soon. All the best. Bye. Shalom.